Hi, I'm James McGuire, and on today's eSpeaks, we're talking about observability, a very popular trend in enterprise tech. Monitoring your infrastructure using observability has become crucial as enterprise deployments get ever more complicated. To take a look at this rapidly growing market, I'm joined by Clint Sharp, Chief Executive Officer of Cribl. Clint, hello to you.
James, it's a pleasure to be here. Excited to talk about observability.
Great. And Clint, how is your week going this week? Is it a busy week, an easy week? Are you just happy to be here at the weekend? What's your sense?
Yeah, it's been a great week. Actually, we're traveling this week to meet with our go-to-market team here in Chicago, and we've been having a great time. Chicago's a wonderful city. We've been enjoying the some really nice dinners and meals, and some reasonable weather for this time of year.
Great. All right, so let's talk about observability. I'm amazed at the trend toward observability. I mean, it's not exactly new, but I didn't hear anything near as much as I do now about it in, say, 2017, 2018. I'd say the last year, couple of years, observability feels like it's really exploded. What are a couple of key trends you see driving observability here in 2022?
Yeah, I think part of the reason why you're seeing, kind of that explosion is a lot of the bigger vendors have picked up the term. And so I think, observability for me, I define as the ability to answer questions based off of the outputs of the system. So I can go ask questions I didn't plan for in advance. I need to be able to say, James, if you're using one of my apps, let's say I'm an airline or I'm a bank, and I'm attempting to know what your particular user experience is, we need a lot of data to answer those questions. I need to be able to see every place you've interacted with that application, every API request you've made, every network transaction that's happening. And we need to be able to sift through massive volumes of data in order to answer those questions. And so I think one of the bigger trends that we're seeing in observability in particular is real tension between data growth, and we see data growing at about a 25% compound annual growth rate, which means you're going to have like 2.5 times more data in 5 years than you have today. And so what that's driving is, and these are already massive data systems. So for example, the customers that we work with, they move terabytes and terabytes of data, and they have petabytes of data at rest. And this is all very costly for them to maintain, because while I need to be able to answer a question about your particular user experience, if you're not having a bad user experience, I'm also collecting a ton of data that's not actually providing me any value at that point in time. And so I think really what we're seeing from our side is that there's kind of an emergence of a newer architecture and observability that's trying to give customers and enterprises in particular, the ability to address massively greater volumes of data at the same cost in order to be able to really meet the needs of a post-digital transformation world.
Now, and by the way, you use the phrase digital transformation. You get 5,000 bonus points for that, Clint. I mean, just right off the bat.
Dinner bingo.
You are on your way to a free game, I think, for sure. And you get another 5,000 bonus points if you ever use the term cloud native. That's a big one. But
we'll get there. We'll get there.
What do we do before observability was hot? I mean, obviously, I guess the IT staff had to run around and go, oh, is server number 8 working, or why is this application gone down? Like, how do people deal with this before observability software really got developed to where it is today?
I think, well, first of all, applications used to be significantly simpler. So if we go back to my, career in IT, and I spent the first decade of my career more on the operations side rather than the vendor side. And, an application would be running on 3 servers, 5 servers, maybe if it was a big application, or, running on a big, Unix machine that they bought from IBM or HP back in the day. And so they would have monitoring tools, the difference between kind of monitoring and observability is monitoring is really there to help you answer things that you already know could go wrong, right? So take, for example, a temperature gauge. Like, I'm sitting in this room and I want to know if the temperature drops below 66 or goes above 77. Like, these are questions I already know to ask of my temperature gauge, and I want to be alerted when something goes wrong. But attempting to understand, for example, oh, hey, after that gauge goes up to 77, how do I diagnose like the HVAC system and actually understand where that problem is where you start to see the emergence of observability. And as applications have gotten significantly more complex, back to the bingo portion where we're hitting things like digital transformation, microservices architectures, I'm going to use cloud native here, and we look at new kind of cloud native architectures, the applications are significantly more complex than they were a decade ago, which means that we need way more data to interrogate them in order to understand the end user's experience and to troubleshoot, complex applications.
Interesting. So people somehow dealt with it. I mean, I guess it was a slower process, and I guess you're talking about the simplicity of applications also made it possible. All right, let's look at a common problem the companies face with observability. I think there's a lot of enterprises getting on board saying, "Hey, we need to have an observability deployment," but of course, it's not always easy. It's a complex system. What are some problems that companies face, and what advice might you give them?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I think generally in the observability space, it's not a one size fits all, sort of operation. So especially larger enterprises tend to mix and match their solutions from a number of different vendors. And so this is an area that we've stepped in to solve, but it's a sort of broader trend in the industry around what we call observability pipelines. And this ability to be able to get the data into multiple places, because the enterprise wants to be able to, for example, send the data to the security team. The security team is going to be looking for threats on the exact same data that the operations team is looking to understand the behavior of that particular application. And they really don't want to have to load a bunch of new agents for every new tool that they roll out. And so, this ability to take a stream of data and send it multiple places, be able to, manipulate that data is an emerging trend that we're seeing. Obviously, we have something to say in it, but we're seeing people implement these, with or without our software, and really kind of assembling these bigger best of breed solutions. I think is where we see nearly all of the bigger enterprises going. Now, in the mid-market, we tend to see people opting maybe for a single vendor solution that has multiple products that meet those needs. And so I think depending on the size of organization you are, you may elect to go in for one vendor who's offering you multiple products and they're already pre-integrated. Or if you're a larger enterprise, you may go best of breed and go get the best in the logging space or the best in the monitoring space or time series database space, and then figure out ways to integrate those solutions. And that seems to be pretty consistent across the enterprises we see and work with.
So those large enterprise customers are actually cobbling together a number of solutions. Is that as much of a headache as it sounds like?
I mean, it can be. And I think the reason why they tend to go that way is because they really do, because of their size and scale, they tend to need the best in any particular category, right? Like another example, I'm a photographer in my spare time, is that, don't go out and buy a fancy camera until you know what the edges of the cheap camera are, until you know how to put that camera to work and say, like, I can't get the picture I want. Then it's time to upgrade to the fancier camera, because then, okay, well, look, I actually know what I'm buying now. I know that I need this feature or that feature. The same thing goes for enterprise software, right? The smaller the organization, a lot of times they don't need the most featureful solution. They just need a solution. And larger enterprises come in and say, like, no, I have this long list of requirements. I need all of these things met. And so that's what pushes them into best of breed and then into an integration challenge. And they also have generally the budgets to be able to go do that. And I think that also then becomes kind of their Achilles heel as well, is because they do have the budget to go do that. Then they start to run into major cost challenges.
Mm-hmm. All right, so let's talk about Cribl itself. I mean, how is your company Cribl addressing the needs of its clients? I mean, what's the Cribl advantage?
Yeah, so I say fundamentally what Cribl sells is choice. And so, in most of the observability space, we end up with data collection and storage and query all from a single vendor. And we sell a product that is an observability pipeline, one of the trends I was mentioning earlier, that allows people to kind of redirect that data and be able to solve a lot of these integration challenges. And that's especially important in the enterprise where they may have tools from a number of different vendors, and they want to be able to, kind of get that data into the right place for that particular use case. They want to enable more teams to be able to get access to data in their own tools, because one of the things that we found, especially with larger enterprises, is each team has kind of a tool of preference that they look at and they say, I want to analyze data in this tool for this use case. For my ML and AI, I want to use one tool, and I want to use a different tool for my data warehouse, and I want to use a different tool for observability and a different tool for security. And being able to get that exact same data into multiple places is an area where we really help out in the enterprise.
I was listening when you answered to hear if you're more in the large enterprise or more of the mid-market. Is you specialize in one or the other, or not necessarily?
We don't necessarily specialize, although I will say that as I mentioned earlier, just in terms of the way we see the market, the larger enterprises tend to have the need that we're solving today more than the mid market, because the mid market tends to be more kind of a hey mono vendor or lower sort of feature set, and so we tend to see the problem that we're solving resonate more with larger enterprises. But we're also starting to see that change a bit, and we're starting to see kind of the mid market coming up and ending up with the kind of the same types of challenges that we're seeing in the enterprise. So it's definitely a growing segment for us.
Interesting. Well, let's look to the future of observability. I'm thinking there's going to be some time, in 2025 or thereabouts, who knows, when the applications have observability so built into them, and artificial intelligence is core to that we're not going to have to really worry about going out and buying a separate observability deployment. Agree, disagree? What do you see for the future of observability?
Yeah, so I think if we're talking about, for example, a vendor provided application, I think going back 20, 30 years, we've seen the kind of management tooling. If it's a big enough market, the vendor will come with its own management tooling. Like a Oracle database has its own monitoring tool, and a Cisco networking stack. Cisco offers their own networking tools. And then you'll still see enterprises tend to go for something more horizontal from another vendor. So I think we'll always see a mix of tooling that's provided by the vendor for their specific solution, more broad horizontal tooling. One of the concepts that we're seeing emerge is this concept of an observability lake. And that's the ability to find someplace more cost effective to process this data significantly more cheaply, because back to that data growth problem, by 2025, organizations are going to have significantly more data than they have in 2022. And so we're always looking for ways to store and process data more cost effectively, because the problem is not so much that organizations are looking to reduce costs, they're really looking to kind of stem the cost of the growth, right? So if I'm going to grow by 25% next year, can I find a more cost effective way of handling that data growth? And observability lakes are giving them the ability to store and process petabytes and petabytes of data significantly more cost effectively than they're able to do in the solutions that are available to them today. And it also gives them control back, because a core concept of an observability lake is kind of a vendor neutrality, open data formats, data that's in under the ownership of the enterprise that produces it, rather than being in proprietary formats where the vendor, you have to continue to pay a vendor in order to query that data. And so this is a really key emerging trend, and I think we'll see significantly more talk over the next 3 years about how to process more data more cost effectively.
That's interesting. The idea of the observability lake, I've never heard that term before. It's a very neat term. It feels like it almost veers into the world of data analytics. Of course, observability itself is all about analytics and intelligence. As I think about that observability lake sitting there, does that mean it'll be mined separately for retail insights or competitive insights?
I think generally you'll see data lakes, the existing data lakes used for business class of data. What makes the observability lake really unique is that IT and security practitioners need a lot of different classes of data that's not typically found in most general purpose data analytics. So things like the ability to look at network captures and be able to look, maybe a malicious actor is navigating their way around the network, and I want to be able to see in detail the full network traffic that goes onto the network. Or perhaps I want to be able to keep deployment artifacts of all the software that I have deployed, all the versions of all the software I've deployed. And I might want to ask a question of that, like, hey, remember the Log4Shell vulnerability recently? What versions of Log4j do I actually have deployed right now? Or what was deployed 6 months ago? Or what was deployed a year ago? Being able to ask and answer those questions are super interesting questions, but it's data that doesn't fit into rows and tables, more like a traditional data warehouse. And so observability lakes are emerging as this place where we can put data that typically hasn't been able to find a home.
Are observability lakes filled with unstructured data? Or not
as well? So logs, monitor logs, metrics, traces, in addition to these newer classes of data. And that doesn't mean that there's not business data, traditional rows and tables and transactions in there as well. But it's generally data that's more for the people running the system versus the people using the system.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Clint, I think you said it. It's fascinating, and it's going to be an interesting sector to follow. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise today.
Thanks, James. It was a pleasure to be on.